welcome everybody to another great episode of Real Life Matters. Of course, I am your host, DBoss, and I'm just hoping that everybody's been doing their 15 minutes of laughing every day, so that will keep you looking youthful, and it'll tone your abs, and it warms up your vocal cords if you have any speaking engagements or if you're singing or stuff like that. It also makes you feel better. It heals your body. You know, there's a lot of benefits to laughing. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, maybe I don't have anybody to laugh with, but you can always call somebody up. You could put on something funny. You could do all those things. And of course, if you don't have anybody, or you say, you know, that's the last resort, so then you could always sign up for some laughing classes. And then that way, that'll get you going. All right, nice. Let's hope everybody's watching me on CaribVision. I'm on primetime night from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're in 28 different countries, including London, UK, BellFibe, channel 658. And also in the U.S., we're on the various networks on the eastern side. And I guess other people will get to that. But we're going to hear something from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back with our special guest.
Welcome to Your Vital Steps to Better Health and Fitness. I'm Joanne James. Today we're going to talk about working out when you have a cold. I get that question quite frequently. Is it a good idea to work out when I have the cold? Well, if you have sniffles, maybe a runny nose, maybe not so bad. You don't want to work out intensely. However, if you have chills and a fever, stay home, take care of your body. Now, when you're exercising, if you have a cold, make sure that you don't work out too intensely. Stay from a basic to moderate intensity workout. And again, if you do have a flu or if you have the chills, don't work out at home. And if you're going to work out, try not to go into a gym or a club to do this. All you're going to do is pass your germs around. So remember, if you have a cold, take your time, let your body heal, then go back to working out at your full intensity when you're ready. I'm Joanne James. This has been your Vital Steps to Better Health and Fitness. We'll see you later.
Well, thank you, Joanne James, for that Vital Steps to Vital Health tips. We're glad to hear that. So I guess a lot of people want to know if they could work out while they are having, or they're under the weather, or they have the flu. You know, a lot of people do want to work out, but some people don't want to. They just want to relax and just wait for it to pass. But anyways, we're going to find out something about this next guest we have here. And this is a little bit different. And a little different. Different is good. It's always good. And what she's doing is she has a dissertation in writing. She uncovers the missing history of the Canadian R&B. So we're going to find out what she did, why she wanted to do this, what was her aspirations, and everything. So with no further ado, I introduce to you Dr. AMARA Pope.
Hi there.
Hi. Boy, this is a little bit of a different topic here now.
I get it. I'm changing things up.
I guess you get that all the time, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of my advisors, even just in the academic world, back when I started, didn't know who Drake was. They didn't know much about R&B music. They didn't know much about Crack of Dawn or some of the legends. So in the academic world, in the media space, I'm kind of the outsider here.
Well, that's it. But here at Real Life Matters, we like to know where everybody's cultural background come from. So if you could tell us.
Sure, of course. I'm a second generation Canadian Trinidadian woman. My parents born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago. They immigrated, had me in Canada, and I was born in Scarborough, Ontario. So there's a lot of Trinis, a lot of Guyanese, a lot of Caribbean immigrants there. So that was awesome. But then when I was in grade 2, they moved me to a small town in Ontario called AMARA, Ontario. And
AMARA.
Yeah, no one knows about that. But AMARA from AMARA has kind of a jingle. And the small town was predominantly white. We were known as the brown family in the corner house. I was the brown girl in school. We were surrounded by farms. Sunnights, horse and buggies. It was a real country out there. And I had a little bit of a culture shock because I experienced the Trinidadian culture at home, but outside in my day-to-day life, it was predominantly white. So I was always the as I mentioned.
Well, Trinidad's a spicy town, very festive, you know, with all.
Oh yeah, they made me represent that Trini culture anywhere I went.
So I guess when people came to your house, they came to a lot of the calypso and soca parties. Then.
Of course, and the Trini food, we'd have doubles, and all my friends would be
roti.
They don't know what coconut food is. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, I got family in Trinidad also, so.
Amazing.
Yeah. In Barbados and Trinidad, so my family on my dad's side, they moved. They said you don't have to stay one place in the Caribbean; you can move to different places.
That's awesome. Well, that's a vacation for you anytime then.
All right. So, what inspired you to do what you do? Like, what made you say, you know what, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write the missing history of the Canadian R&B artist.
Well, I, as mentioned, grew up in a predominantly small white town in Ontario. So I found that a lot of my friends, a lot of my teachers even, and leaders just around me didn't know much about R&B music because in Canada it was long underdeveloped and long unsupported by mainstream media, by the music industry. A lot of Caribbean artists that were born and raised in other countries and came to Canada and started creating hip-hop music, R&B music, reggae, soca, had to go to the States to gain any kind of following and support from the music industry and then move back to Canada to finally be celebrated. So what allowed me to kind of pursue this topic was that passion I had for representing my culture in Canada when we have so many Caribbean immigrants here that contributed to this culture and yet didn't get that recognition.
Yeah, and that is true, because a lot of us back in the time when R&B, funk, and all that just came out, we all used to go to New York. Everybody was in New York.
Exactly. When I talk about that,
we went to New York and came back with all the vinyl records and the stuff that we bought in New York, and of course all the DJs and everybody would be playing that music, and then they would go back again the next weekend to New York for the R&B culture, and as I mentioned, the R&B, a lot of people thought rock and roll was going to live for a long time because a lot of people used to fight about that in school, in college and high school. They used to say, oh, funk, no, that's not, it sucks and all that, and then rock and roll will live forever. But look what's happened. The hip-hop's here, R&B's still here, it's advanced, and people who've paved the way, like Drake and not Drake. Well, Drake, yes, but before Drake, there was Crack of Dawn.
Exactly.
A lot of other bands that weren't all, were very popular, but they became popular, and they had to endure a lot of abuse for the music.
And I talk about that in the dissertation because I originally wanted to look at the marketing and branding strategies of artists Drake, Justin Bieber, and Jessie Reyes, because they all try to participate in R&B, all of different racial identities, all Canadian. But when I went to look at their marketing strategies and build on the work of the artists before them, I found that history was missing in a lot of academia. We had articles here and there and some trade magazines that featured artists like Mishimi, Maestro, Fresh West, Crack of Dawn, but they weren't canonically put into a text to say this is Canadian R&B music. So I had to do the work of putting together like an episodic history of Canadian R&B. I obviously couldn't do the full history. I'd take my stab at attempting to write that history and then talk about how Drake, Bieber, and Reyes built on the backs and the networks that these artists created before them, and then had access to social media to then push it forward. Because I argue that they represent new generations of Canadian R&B that had more access to audiences and networks because of what these artists did before them, but also because of online communication. when I talk about how you were mentioning getting the record from New York, I talk about how Mission Me physically traveled to Buffalo to purchase rap records and then brought them to Toronto.
And the clothes too,
Parties.
because the clothes were a big
Exactly.
part of the culture.
Yeah.
You know, the running shoes, you got something from New York. Everybody was like, what? We got something. And you're showing it off.
It's true. And even so, the limited access we had with border stations. So those that love the hip hop and martial culture had to go to the border stations to get that access. And of course, Canada's huge. So the few border stations we had didn't encompass all of Canada. And yet there was that passion and that energy for this kind of music. So it's a sad but also very inspiring story to look at how all these artists have so many hardships but pushed forward to represent their culture in Canada.
So did you get a lot of people saying to you, why are you doing this topic?
Definitely.
Or doing this research?
Yeah.
Why do that?
And my answer was always based on that experience of growing up in Canada and being in such a small town, but moving from Scarborough, where it was so diverse, so multicultural, having so many immigrants there, just moving there, trying to make a future for themselves, their families, and having had parents who moved to Canada from Trinidad and experienced that struggle to get representation, to face racism and many occurrences. I wanted to spread that awareness about how many Canadian immigrants created the music that we now love and celebrate.
Well, and also Montreal was a very big part.
Yes.
Because I grew up in Montreal.
Oh, you
even
did?
though
Okay.
I'm from out west, even though I'm from Saskatchewan. But I grew up in Montreal, and this was, there was the music. This is where everybody, the bands came from New York. The bands came from the U.S. They would play live band. We'd be dancing to funk, R&B, live. You know, and we paid maybe, some clubs we didn't pay to go in. Others we went and we paid, it was $5 or $10 to go in. And we'd be dancing with the band and they'd be playing, and they were so good. And some of them, we didn't even know who some of them, and then of course, when Cameo and all these different ones came out, you know, we had guys that would go around and dress like, yes, they had everything right down to the part there.
And interesting, because I 100% agree with you. And I found that in doing this research, I got to hear stories from people like you who just grew up in the culture. I got to interview marketing professionals and music industry executives to conduct my research, and then just look at interviews that people have mentioned their experiences, as well as looking at the academic research. And I found people, for example, we have Rebecca Haynes, who discussed in 1999 how Toronto and Montreal specifically had such a strong hip hop culture. And yet, like I kept saying, it's been overlooked. It hasn't been recorded correctly in academic history and academic research. So I had a very interesting PhD because I had to go to the academic world, but also a lot of the pop culture world and conduct a lot of the interviews myself. So that was an interesting synergy between being in the industry space, but also being in academia.
Right. So, you know, even when they brought the bands to, you know, it was a lot. It was a lot of work to get these R&B bands. Like when I saw Tina Turner in Montreal, Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5s came, SOS, what was the big one there that, one of the big bands there, all those big bands that had like 12, 15 people in it, you know, and they came, and when they came, the place was, they couldn't even get enough people because the people were so happy that these bands were coming to Canada because people could actually, we can actually
and
could actually go.
I found that
people thought the Lord was coming the way that people were getting
that's also to show how deprived they were, because they got so excited when they got that taste of the music that they loved. And I found that, you know, you're mentioning a lot of names, and it's true, a lot of the artists that we're visiting were actually from the US. And it's great that we had that exposure, but we also had so many homegrown artists in R&B and hip hop that didn't get their chance on the street, unless they went and then came back to Canada.
Yeah, and it's really sad that a lot of people, to make it here, to get the support
Yeah.
here, a lot of them have to go outside. They got to go to Europe. They got to go to the States. They got to go somewhere else. And then as soon as they get popular, oh, then they come right back into the fold.
Right.
You know,
No.
into Canada. Oh, that person's Canadian. Like, you know, like Shania Twain, different people. You know,
Justin
were
Bieber
here.
sometimes
And
they
Justin Bieber,
think
a
they're
lot.
American. Yeah.
I thought a lot of people thought that these people were American. Then you're thinking, oh, they come from where I am.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of artists like Nishi Mi, she titled her album to demonstrate, you know, it's Jamaican funk but Canadian style, and that's how she named her album. Or Maestro Crush West saying, "Nah,
They're all
from
families
Canada."
here. He came
Yeah.
out here too.
So they're on the top of the charts in the U.S., but they're inserting that they are from Canada. And Cardinal Official, of course, reps wherever he goes that he's from Canada, that he's from the T.O. So there's a lot of artists who tried to assert their Canadianness in American media.
Well, it's hard, you know, because they don't want to say where they actually came from Canada. You know, but you know, here a lot of big people birth from here. You know, so you know, because we're not as big and populated as the U.S., but we still it's even down to the Black history with the slaves running over here and people coming here. A lot of people, you know, just say, oh, it was slavery was in the U.S. and it was, but a lot of them came here and they started things here.
Yeah,
So,
and
you know, they
a lot of that. Yeah, and a lot of the history I talk about with R&B is tied to Black identity and their treatment in
Right.
Canada. So I talk about, we had Black slavery practiced in the U.S. or in Canada
Right.
and U.S. We had segregation, racial segregation between Black and white identities in Canada as much as we had in, you know, well, not as much, but we also had that at practice in Canada versus the U.S. as well. And I think it's very funny because Canada's painted as this multicultural, happy space, but we've also had racism very much integrated in our policies and just in everyday practice. So I think looking at that history of Black identity in Canada was a really important contribution to look at that history. Because at the end of the day, I talk about so many immigrants participating in R&B, but when it comes to it, it's so deeply indebted to Black US culture as well. So while I say it's important that R&B be open to many identities, it's also equally important to know that history of where R&B came from and understand the struggles that many artists face to participate in this space.
Okay, so can you get your thesis? Do you have it in a novel or a book form, or it's just how can people research this information?
They can go to my website, so www.dramarafolk.ca, and there I have the full dissertation, which is 406 pages if you have the time and want to read it. But if you want a short version of it, a nice little presentation summary about 30 minutes, I have that uploaded as well. So you can get kind of the highlight reel without reading 406 pages.
Okay, so do you charge for that?
No, it's completely free. I have all of that accessible. A big thing I'm advocating for is having free education, and I think that's super important. So all of my findings are accessible.
Oh, okay. All right, so who are you going to be working on next?
Well, right now, I think it's still important to really assert that history is there. And so at the moment, I'm just trying to advocate for understanding that dissertation, teasing out the 406 pages as I can. Simultaneously, while I've been doing academia, I've also been in industry. So I'm working as a marketing manager for a telematics company in construction. That's how I pay my bills. So while I'm pursuing the academic world, I am working and practicing as a marketing manager.
Okay, all right. Okay, so are there any shout outs that you want to give to your people or anybody that helped you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest shout out I want to give is to Peter Kitely. That was my advisor for my PhD dissertation. He's a professor at Western University where I graduated. Pam and Cindy were also at Western University, and they really helped me throughout my career. Number one, I want to thank my parents, because if they didn't have that Trinidadian immigrant struggle in Canada, I wouldn't have been inspired to do this paper. My little brother, Imtico, my new husband, Desmond Sanfilippo, I just got married the same week I graduated. So this year has been crazy for me. And then just all those trees and all those Caribbean immigrants that push through for Canadian R&B to have a space and have a voice.
All right. So you just want to tell people where they can contact you if they want to give you any more information?
Yes, so you can reach me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Dr. AMARA Pope is my handle, or visit my website at www.dramarapope.ca.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, finding out what you do and what your focus on was for the, the history of the Canadian R&B, who actually paved the way. And a lot of the people that you mentioned, I've interviewed on the show here. So, he did Crack of Dawn, Maestro Fresh West. So he's been here. He told about all what he does and stuff. So, you've actually, hit on a few. Missy Me, she's supposed to be coming on soon. So,
amazing.
In the new year.
I know, and there's those names and a million others that are in the dissertation, and even those that don't fall within that really paved the way for Canadian R&B.
Yeah. All right. So, we'll keep people follow her, find out what's going. She's got, she compiled a lot of history on Canadian R&B music, and the artists that have been hidden around that they got to go to the U.S. before they get recognized and they come back to Canada, and then they insert that they're Canadian because you might think they're American, but then they insert the name after.
Exactly.
All right. So I do want to thank the people for watching tonight. So goodbye and for now.